they were the guards and he was the prisoner. So so when you're talking about
so even a person who is normally good and law-abiding and has good intentions can go beyond the pale depending on the circumstances. And you see this in every war that happens. People who would never dream of doing things like this revert to barbarity very quickly.
You know, there is a page in here that you referred to, which I thought that was very interesting, about the European Jews. It said the European Jews had their group shattered before the Nazis began carting them off. They did not put up a concerted resistance to being taken to the death camps. But once the Zionist immigrants from Europe were in Palestine, the British expected them to be pushovers for colonial rule. But it was the English who were sent home with their tails between their legs by a newly ferocious and closely knit group that had rediscovered the power of keeping the inside separate from the outside. The group had found new ways to care. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I was kind of surprised. I often wondered why, you know, that during the European invasion of, you know, Germany against the Jewish people, how they allowed themselves to be led into the slaughter, and yet the Israelis, I mean, they're...
Forget about it.
Yeah.
Well, if you go back to the concept of groupness, part of the evolutionary advantage of groupness is to defend against outsiders, means you survive, right? So your DNA is perpetuated. The Nazis very cleverly shattered the groupness of the Jews by doing things like preventing them from worshiping, putting them in ghettos, and systematically destroying those elements that had cohesively held them together as a group. By the time they were carting them off, the groupness was pretty well debilitated, and so these people didn't have that strength to resist that you would expect to find in a close-knit group. Once they got to a new land and reassembled themselves, it was a different story altogether. So once they had re-exerted that groupness factor, they were pretty ferocious. And this too explains many of the upset victories in warfare that we see throughout history, where a very small group like the Spartans could defend against a really large army, and it seems baffling, but this helps to explain it.
So you say that the group, once they're in, what happened, Hitler destroyed the groups, and so there was more separateness, and people seem to get strength from the group.
Right.
They draw their strength from their group, and when they somehow tear that group apart, and they have to defend for themselves, they don't do the
They
same.
lose that cohesiveness, right.
That is really interesting.
Christianity was built in a similar way. You know, Christ said, "Leave your father and follow me." Well, he was destroying the groupness of these people to create his own new group. So it's a common technique to do.
You know, that's very interesting, because I often wondered what happened in Germany. I mean, I couldn't understand how people allowed themselves to be just, you know, you follow me, you know. They followed. Actually, they ended up following another group that destroyed them.
Yeah.
Maybe they somehow needed to be in another group. I don't know. I never thought about it that way.
This has happened many times when the Japanese invaded Nanking in China and murdered so many people there. There were not that many Japanese in this invasion compared to the number of people in that city in China, and yet they went with impunity among these Chinese and led them to the slaughter and did the same kinds of things after having destroyed their own group boundaries. And you can see photographs if you read the history of this place, Nanking, China. You can see photographs in which there are a few Japanese officers surrounded by like tens of thousands of Chinese people. And you think, wow, well, why didn't they just, you know, they could have killed them with their bare hands.
Right.
But, you know, it's fascinating.
It is very fascinating. You also wrote about, in your book, about, which I want you to explain, Harry Plotkin. He's a psychobiologist at the University College London. And he said that people tend to generalize into the future. What worked in the past will work. Like past represents future, whatever worked before worked again. And I wondered what happened in the Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, their campaigns, where Hillary Clinton, she campaigned, basically she did her fundraising like she did in the past, you know, where Obama used internet, Twitter, Facebook, he used anything electronically to reach young voters and college and in college. And what I want you to explain about generalizations and analogies, and how what really happened according to Harry Plotkin, psychobiologist.
Well, if you think about it, one of the main functions of our brain is to predict the future. And all organisms predict the future in some way or another. If you take a bacterium, for example, that will eat sugar, that swims in water and will eat sugar, and if you put it in a vessel where the concentration of sugar is lower at this end and higher at this end, the bacterium will swim upstream to the higher concentration of nutrient, in effect predicting that this is going to, you know, things are going to get better over there. So that's a very simple version, but we all predict the future in some ways. In fact, part of what we say is intelligence is guessing well, guessing about the future. A natural strategy that has evolved over millions of years is to assume that the future is going to look like the past. So whatever you've learned with the idea that you're going to have to repeat this because it's going to happen again. This strategy may not always be right, but statistically over time, it's proven pretty reliable because creatures tend to stay in their own environment and things do tend to happen in a similar way over and over again. So if you go to this one spot and there's a water hole and you get water, you probably go back there the next day figuring that there'll be water there. But there are many ways in our modern world where that's not the best strategy. And so one of the things I talk about in this book is how modern systems that are intelligent, that have good evolutionary sense behind them, can trip us up when we're not, you know, on the savannah in Africa anymore. And that system of predicting the future is certainly one of them.
So you're saying, can we disrupt these models? You know, in the different setting, the script may be outlived its usefulness?
Yes, definitely. And I think part of the point of what I say in these books is in order to disrupt these models, you have to become aware of them in the first place. So you have to become aware of the fact that you're making mental models. And I talk a lot about behavioral scripts, which are these automated behaviors we have. Most people, for example, amazingly enough, can drive a car on automatic pilot. They can drive a car while talking on the cell phone, while drinking a latte, while correcting the kids in the back seat, and never even know they'll go 12 blocks without thinking, like, what's going on around them. And so these behavioral scripts, as I call them, can get very complex. And most of what we do, most of our lives, is made up of behaviors like this that go on unconsciously. And so part of what I say in this book is you really have to step back and pay a little bit more attention to what you're actually doing to avoid these kind of mistakes. And you know, there are simple things you can do in your life that will show you exactly how this system works. I always advise people to go into your kitchen and take all of the coffee cups out of the cabinet wherever you keep them and put them in a different cabinet. And I want you to now watch yourself and tell me how many months it's going to take you before you actually get up in the morning and go to the correct cabinet. Or you just do something simple like move your wastebasket in your office from one corner to another and watch yourself throw paper on the floor for the next 3 months while you try to learn where you put the wastebasket. It's not like you don't know that you moved the wastebasket.
Well, you know, Lawrence, I see I'm getting my camera people are saying to wrap up, and you know, I really want to, there's so much more to learn from you. I mean, look I have all these books now to go through. I've already been through one book, to second book, and now I have to go through your third book. And I do want to invite you back to talk about Lucy and to learn more about some of your different things that you've suggested. And you are amazing guests. I mean, I have to think about, I got to go home and think about everything that you talked about, because, and then it'll make a little bit more sense to me. I mean, there's so much to learn by talking to you. I
Thank
really
you,
am.
Suzanne.
And I really enjoyed you as a guest, and I really welcome you back.
Thank you.